Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, so I think we're doing with Yosef. I think that's where we left off. So it says here like this. He brings this Gemara in Chulin Kuf Vav Amud Aleph. V'chen mashma v'gasin per kol basar. It says over there, Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, Hava Kaim Nakamed Rabbi Ameh. So this rabbi says, I was standing in front of these rabbis, right? Rabbi Ameh and Rabbi Aseh. I to Lakamayu Kalkala de Pere. So what happened? They brought in front of them a basket of fruits. The achul, and they ate. Below mashu ad yadayhu. They didn't wash their hands. Below yavilu midi, and they didn't give me anything. Umasik de shama mina. So he concludes from there. Then mezamnin ala perot. We don't do zimun on fruits. Okay, that's good. The emazamnin ala perot, because if we would, they would give him to eat, so therefore they could do zimun. So we learned from this story that we don't do zimun on fruits. So as we said yesterday, right, we only do it on bread, basically. That's what it is, Okay, so let's move on a bit, Yosef. Then it says, we should. וכן ארבעה או חמישה עד כיוון שנתחייבו בהזכרת השם. So same thing, right, applies when you have 4 or 5 people. In other words, 3, 4, 5 is all the same. That has the same rule, right? Okay, so but as we said, right, when you have 10, that changes everything. Why is that? Because now you have to say the name of God. But until 10, it's all the same. So says the Bit Yosef on that. Pashut b'Mishnah perek shlosha she'achlu, right? The Mishnah there in Nun Amud Aleph in Brachot. כתוב בתוספתא, it says in תוספתא, ברכות, in ברכות, פרק ה', ב-20 נחלקו, so now, right, what about if you have 20 people? So there, right, ובלבד שלא יהיה בהם אחד שמפתילים אותו מן הזימון. Right, so he says, right, if you have 20 people, the rule is you can divide up, into halves, like, 10 and 10. Why is that? Because once you have 10, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to mention the name of God. So having 20 doesn't really help you anymore. So therefore, if you have 20, you can divide it up into 2 groups of 10. But what you can't do is, right, to have 10 and 9, because then, right, it's going to be those 9 guys are not going to have the name of God. That's what he's saying over here. Let's say if one of them would leave or something, right? So then there would only be 9. That would be no good. So it says, when you early, seems to be says, Bet Yosef. The Hachi Perusho, this is the way you explain it. Ha the Esrim Nechlakim Dafka. When do we say that 20 can divide up into two pieces, into two groups? Dafka Keshashum Echad Mehem Lon Zimin Klal. That's when any one of them, no one of them has done zimun. So they're all liable, they're all obligated. Aval im echad mehem kadam bezimen. But if one of them already did zimun before, bishlosha with three people, or berach birkat hamazon, or he blessed birkat hamazon, that's one of himself. Enam nechlakim. So now they cannot divide into two pieces, two groups. Deotam she'imo enam yecholim lezamen. So he says, why is that? Because those that are with him cannot do zimun. Why? Because they only have nine. B'shem, in the name of God, you can't do it. Kiman shehu kadam b'zimen. Why is that? Because he already did zimun before, so he's already out of the picture. He's out of commission, this guy. Right? Parach zimun. So therefore, he lost his zimun. Ve'eno mitzaref imahem. So he doesn't combine with them. So there you go. Right? That's the problem. Okay, then he moves on. Uh, and we said, right, that it is a mitzvah to try to have 10 because, then we can mention the name of God. So regarding that, says Bet Yosef, "Chen katuv be'agot Maimon." So it says in Hagot Maimon, Perek Hey, ube'evi raya midyamin Perek shelosha she'achlu. He brings a source from in this Gemara, right over there in Brachot again. Ravina ve'Rav Chama ikleu lebe resh galuta. Right. So these two rabbis happen to be with the resh galuta, right? You guys remember what's resh galuta, right? That's the chief rabbi there in Bavel. Okay, so anyway, right? Kam Rav Chama v'kam mehader abe me'ah. Oh, so right, this rabbi is trying to look for 100 people, to do zimun. Amale Ravina lo tzrichat. So Ravina tells him, you don't need that. I'm sorry, but 10 is enough. Why do you need 100 for? They're not gonna help you to have 100. Rabbi halacha Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi said halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar en chiluk ben mea v'le'esrim le'asara. There's no difference between 10 and 100. That's how he paskins Rabbi Akiva. Mikom makom shaminan. This is nevertheless we learn from this. Miatam the mitzvah lechazer acharasa. But at least right there is a mitzvah to try to get 10. Right, at least that much we do want. We want to try to get that if we can. So therefore, you learn from this whole passage here that let's say you have a group, right? You have some kind of a party going on, right? Function, some kind of thing. So there's like a big group of people there. And, sometimes what happens is that some guys, who come to these parties, the weddings and all that stuff, right? Bar mitzvahs, they need to leave early, they can't stay very late. They got to go to work, they got things to do. They got to take their kids to school, all kinds of stuff, right? So they can't stay there, till like the wee hours, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. They can't do that. They got to be in bed by 11, So what they do is they leave early. Now, what happens is, right, that, they want to like do zimun, because after all, right, there's a group of people there. You want to do zimun. So what they do is, they divide it up into groups, they make like a small group, so they can do zimun. And then, right, this guy can leave, not feeling guilty they didn't do zimun. But the thing is, that sometimes they make this mistake, which is that they divide it up into groups of three, and they don't say the name of God. So that's not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do it this way. Right? What you have to do is break it up into groups of 10, right? This way, each one will say the name of God. But make groups of three is not going to do the job. Because then you're reducing, right, the mitzvah. That's what we're saying over here. Okay. So then he moves on. So it says, if there was a big group, right, all together, as we said, right, big party, whatever, something like that. וכולי, etc., etc. בסוף פרק שלושה שאכלו, right, where this also in the same parak in the Gemara there. אמר רבא כי אכלינן ליפתא בריש גלותא. Oh, so says Rava, when we used to, have meals, right, at the house of the Resh Galuta, mevarchinan tlata tlata. Oh, so he says we used to do three by three. Oh, okay, right. So why would you want to do that, right? As we said, you should try to go for 10. Velivrachu asara asara. So Gemara asks, right? But wait, you should do 10 by 10. Why 3 by 3? Shema shamar esh galuta v'ikpad. Wow, wow, wow. Oh. Benifku bebirkata deresh galuta. Oh. So what happened, right? The Resh Galuta found out about this, that they were breaking up into groups of 3. So guess what? He got angry at them. He got ticked off. He was like, hey, what are you guys doing over here? This is not the way. I'm sorry. You know? And so Gemara asks a question now, right, regarding this. Why don't they just, right, fulfill the obligation with the Resh Galuta, with his zimun? Aide de avshe kule alma lo sham'u. Right, so he's telling you like this, right? Since there's a lot of noise over there, right? Not everybody hears it. So I think that's what it means. We'll see. Rashi is going to explain now, right? All this story here. So Perish Rashi explains, Haba mevarchinan tlata tlata. They were doing 3 by 3, as we said, right? Resh Galuta marich beseudato. So Resh Galuta had these like long banquets going on, right? And so it's like you gotta have patience, otherwise you go crazy. Right? ואנא כל שלושה שגמרו סעודתן מזמין וכל נמוך. So he says what we used to do is we would divide up into groups of 3, and do like a little zimun, with the whispering, whatever. ויושבין אחר הברכה עד שגמר resh galuta. And then what they would do is, like sit until the resh galuta finished, right, and this zimun. Who ויושבים אצלו, the ones who his whole entourage there, right, בקול רם in a loud voice. Right. So Shamar Resh Galuta heard about this, as we said, right? Im hayu mezamnim asara asara, hayat tzarich lamevarech leagbiya kolo. So he says, right, if they were doing 10 by 10, then the one who blesses would have to raise up his voice. Vishmar Resh Galuta, the Resh Galuta would hear that. Oh. Right? And then he'll get angry. Shanu osim chabura leatzmenu v'faresia. They were making like an own group, It's like an insult to the Resh Galuta, After all, he's a president, you know what I mean? Come on. You can't play with a president like that. Disrespectful. So, Afagav, Demafke Nefshayo, Midi Zimun, Shel Askat Hashem, says even though they're right, fulfilling the obligation of mentioning God's name, even though I'm sorry, they're not fulfilling the obligation. Even because they're doing it by 3 by 3. So then when the Resh Galuta would do it with the name of God, the Zimun, they can't really fulfill their obligation. Then Zimun because you can't do Zimun, twice. You already did it, you're done, that's it. But he says, nevertheless, right, it was good for them to do like this. Mishum de avshe kule alma shayu sham misubim rabim ben kol mevarech nishma. Right. So the thing is that but they prefer to do it this way in this scenario to have 3 groups of 3. Why? Even though, as we said, right, in a normal manner, you're not supposed to do it this way. But here, there was a lot of guests, right, and there was noise, as we said, right? And therefore, the one who's blessing is not really heard. They can't hear him. So therefore, right? That's why, they had to do like this was what do they call that, right? This was the lesser of all evils, this way, because there was no other way for them to do it. This is what we call, in English, we call this politics. There was a lot of politics going on there, respect this, right? All kinds of stuff, right? We don't want to make noise, politics, right? All kinds of things. So therefore, they had to, accommodate the situation and do it in a manner like this, even though this is not the best way, as we said. But they had no choice. Okay, great. So that's the story there. V'zeh lashon harosh. Now he brings the language of the Rosh here. Af al pi shnitchayavu b'birkat Hashem, even though that they were obligated to do like to bless the name of God with 10 people. Tov lahem zeh mima shelo hayu yotzim b'birkat Hamazon. This was the best scenario for them, according to the situation. Shelo hayu cholim lishmoa et hamvarech, because they couldn't really hear when the Resh Galuta, right, is blessing, because the crowd was too big. That's why today, we have microphones, so we have it's a little bit easier for us. So the right the head of the household, whatever, right? The host is gonna right what do you call it, take a microphone and everybody's gonna hear him fine. So today we have a solution for that. But in the old days, right, there was no microphones, there was no loudspeakers, right? Things like this. They didn't have those things then. Okay, very good. So we'll go on. So he said that's what the Torah is saying is also the same thing. So it seems to me he says that which he said that they're not able to hear the blessing for the blessing of his blessing. It's talking about the zimun. And that which he wrote, it's better than then not doing Birkat Hamazon altogether. Chobat Zimun Kamar. It's talking about Zimun really, right? Not Birkat Hamazon. Because Birkat Hamazon you can do yourself. It's no big deal. Deilu Yedei Chobat Birkat Hamazon Apa Pisha Lo Yishme'u. So he says even though they won't hear Mipian Barech from the person who's blessing, Ayu Cholim Lesat Alidei Shevarech Kol Echad Detzmo. As we said, each one can do it by himself, no big deal. דאין הסברה לומר שצריכים לשמוע כל הברכה מפי המברך. Because it doesn't make sense, he says, that they have to hear the whole blessing from the person who's blessing. ואינם רשאים לברך על כל אחד ברכת המזון לעצמו, and they're not permitted, right, to do ברכת המזון, each one by himself. דאדרבא טוב שיברך ברכת המזון כל אחד בעצמו. Just the opposite, right, on the contrary. It's better to do like that, each one by himself, as we already mentioned. Belachash, right, and silently. Ukimosh katavti b'siman kuf pegimel, like we already said in the right chapter 183. Right. Okay, great. So we're done with this. Okay, so this was which one? This was Aleph. Okay. So we'll do Shulchan Aruch Aleph, and we'll take it from there. I think we have to bring it up because it's a new chapter here. But this says Kuf Tzadik Gimel. This chapter. Okay, good. Kuf Tzadik Gimel. Okay, so it says in Shulchan Aruch, שניים שאכלו, two people ate, ואף על פי שברכת המוציא פוטר אחד את חברו, even though when it comes to המוציא, right, each one, one can, right, fulfill the obligation of his fellow, מצווה לחלק שיברך כל אחד ברכת המזון לעצמו. But when it comes to ברכת המזון, it's a mitzvah that each one should say by himself, as we already mentioned. במה דברים אמורים? כשהיו שניהם יודעים לברך ברכת המזון. When was that said? If both of them know how to bless ברכת המזון, right? They both know how to read it, whatever, right? אבל אם אחד יודע והשני אינו יודע, but it says if one knows and one doesn't know, מברך היודע ויוצא השני. So then the one who knows how to bless will do it, and the other one will listen to him, right? Obviously. אם מבין לשון הקודש, אלא שאינו יודע לברך. So what does that mean? He understands Hebrew, but he doesn't know how to bless. צריך לכוון. So that implies that if he doesn't know Hebrew, he cannot do this, right? But it seems to me, and that's interesting. Let's see what he says. אלא שאינו יודע לברך. צריך לכוון מילה במילה. So it says you have to look what he says, right? You have to concentrate word by word, like when you're listening to somebody like this, which is very hard, The whole מה everything he says. וצריך לברך שיכוון להוציאו. And also the one who's blessing has to have in mind to fulfill his obligation. שאכלו, okay. אבל אם אינו מבין, but what about if he doesn't know Hebrew, right? Doesn't understand Hebrew. What happens there? אינו יוצא ממשמיע. He doesn't, wow, if he can't fulfill his obligation by listening to it. Wow. אבל ג' שאכלו אינם רשאים לחלק. But, right, we already mentioned, if there was 3 that ate, they're not allowed to divide up, as we said. Why? Because then they're going to lose the zimun. So as we mentioned yesterday, today, nowadays what we do is we do the zimun and then each one does Birkat Hamazon by himself. So this way we do both, both ways, whatever, something in the middle. Comes out pretty good. This way you get the best of both worlds. Okay. So that's that. And then שניים שאכלו מצוות שאכלו בחודש השלישי, ואינו מציאות בשמיעה, כן. שניים שאכלו מצוות שחזרו אחר השלישי שהצטרף עמהם. So he says, right, that if 2 people ate, so it's a mitzvah to bring in, a third guy, right? This way they should be able to do zimun. So if they can pick up some third guy, along the way somewhere, right? Somebody who's passing by, just tell them, you want to join us? Yeah, we got some food here. You hungry? Come on in. Right? So you bring them in. Right? Like that, right? That's what he's saying. Also, right, if you have 4 or 5 people, they cannot divide because, there'll be like less than 3 in one group. So we don't want that. Because all of them are obligated to zimun. Once they had a group already, they all became obligated. So now don't divide it up. No good. You can't do that. Okay, great. So then it says Shisha nechlakim. But if you have 6 people, they can divide it into two groups of 3, right? That will be okay. Because each one will get his zimun, there. So you didn't lose nothing. Then he says, Keman she'ishaer zimun echol chabura ad asara. So he says, once The Zimun, right, will then so you can do that until you get to 10, right? As we said. Once you get to 10, you can't divide it up, right? Otherwise, you're going to lose the name of God. So you can't divide it until you get to 20, Then you can divide it into two groups of 10. Okay. So says the Ramah here, the Az Yecholim Lichalek, now they can divide it up אם ירצו if they want. ונראה לי דהו הדין דשישה אינם מחויבים לחלק. Also, right, when it comes to six, obviously they're not obligated to split up. רק אם ירצו נחלקים, just if they need to or if they want to, whatever, right, they could. But not that they have to, or that's not what it means. כיוון שנתחייבו בהזכרת השם, once they're obligated to do the mention name of God, mitzvah לחזור אחר עשרה. It says also there's mitzvah to try to get 10, So if you have like 9 guys, whatever, so try to bring, the 10th guy. This way you'll say the name of God. So pull him in, right? Tell him, okay, come on, let's eat. We got some good food for you. Come in, let's do it. כיוון שנתחייבו בזכות השם, מצווה לחזר אחר עשרה, אם היו רבים מסובים יחד, but it says if you have a big group, right, some kind of party going on there, so then, ואינם רשאים לחלק לחברות של עשרה, so they're not allowed to divide up into, I'm sorry, they're not able to hear the zimun, from the main guy, from the host, right? They can't hear it. The group is too big, no microphone, right? It's too bad. What can you do? ואינם רשאים לחלק לחברות של עשרה. So they're not allowed to break up into groups of 10. שיצטרכו לברך בקול רם, because then they would have to do in a loud voice, וישמע בעל הבית, so then the host will hear it, ויקפיד עליהם, and he'll get mad at them, he'll say like, hey, you guys, you're like, you're disturbing my party here. What's going on? You're rattling my party here. יכולים לחלק לחברות של ג'. So then they can do groups of 3. As we said, ולברך בנחת, and do it like, quietly. כדי שלא ישמע בעל הבית, in order that the host should not hear. וזה טוב להם ממה שלא יצייצו ידי חובה בברכת המזון, זימון. And that's better than not doing zimun at all. Okay. שהרי אינם יכולים לשמוע מפי המברך. Why? Because they can't really hear it, as we said, right, from the host. So there's no, other choice besides this. So this is the only scenario that they could do it. That's it. Okay, great. So that's the Shulchan Aruch. So we'll go to Bet. So it says Bet Yosef over here. כתב רבנו יונה ז"ל, says רבנו יונה, הדתנן שלושה שאכלו אינם רשאים לחלק. That which we said, right, that 3 to 8, they cannot divide it up. דווקא כשקבעו עצמם ביחד. That's only if they decided to eat together, as a group. ואדוני הראש ז"ל כתב, תנראה לי כדברי המפרשים. So it seems to me, it says, the Dorosh, like the commentaries, שאף על פי שלא ברכו המוציא ביחד, even though they didn't do המוציא together, they still should do zimun. So meaning what? That he's arguing with Rabbeinu Yonah. who said that if they didn't eat as a group, they don't really have to do zimun together. They can divide up. Okay, good. So that's that. Okay, I'm sorry. So let's move on. Kol zikata barosh beresh perek shlosha shachlu. The Rosh writes this in this perek, right, which is in Brachot. Bezel leshono, this language, shlosha shachlu keachad. He says, right, three people that eat together. Katav Rabbeinu Yonah, says Rabbeinu Yonah, demared shikav uatzman biyachad. He says that's only talking about when they decide to eat together as a group. Mitchila lebirkat hamotzi, to do bar motzi together. Ledidhu beseba deledidan beshiva. They used to do reclining. We just sit. Az enam rashaim lechalek. So then they cannot divide up into pieces, into little groups, whatever, right, or individuals. Aval im no nikbeu yachad. But if they didn't decide to eat together, birkat hamotzi udamotzi rashaim lechalek. Then they can divide it up. But dikdek ze mihad so per ketzad mevarchin. So he learns this from right brachot in Mem Bet Amud Bet. Tanan, right? We learn by Mishnah there. Hesebu echad mevarech lekulam. So if they decide to recline, sit together, right, as a meal, as a group, so then each one, right, each one blesses for everybody. But daikinan the hesebu. So that's like the deduction is that they reclined. En lo in, yes, lo hesebu. But if they didn't recline, right, they didn't make a group. Ruminhu. Lo, if not so. Minhu asara bnei adam, but then they contrasted this with some other teaching. And asara bnei adam shayu me'alchin b'derech. Let's say you have 10 people that are going on the road. Afa pi she'ochlim mikikar echad, even though they're eating from one loaf of bread. Kol echad mevarech la'atzmo, each one blesses by himself. Yashvu, if they sat together to eat. Afa pi she'kol echad ochel mikikaro, even though each one eats from his own right, loaf, echad mevarech lekulam, one blesses for everybody. Okay. Okay, I think we can probably finish this one. We'll try to finish it off here. Got a little bit more to go. So it says, Yashvu afa pi shelo asebu. They sat even though they didn't recline. Mokela Rav Nachman kegon de'amrein, and Rav Nachman, right, qualifies this as saying that they said, Nezel v'nechul nehama beduchta palan. Let's go and eat bread in a certain place, right? Dehave kamo esebu, so that's like reclining. In other words, they made like a group meal. V'hai baraita b'birkat hamazon aire. So he says this baraita is talking about birkat hamazon. Katana Yerushalmi, like it says in Yerushalmi, ve'im ita de lo ba kibiyut lezimun. And if you're going to tell me that it doesn't need to be have a group, group thing in zimun, ama itzrich Rab Nachman leokma, then why did Rab Nachman need to qualify it b'shekavu that they made a group zemil? Makom tipok leb michevan sheachlu keechad. Then he should, learn it from the fact that they ate together. Um, קבעתן זו אכילה, אלא ודאי קביעות מתחילה הוא שמחייבים בזימון. So therefore you see from there he says that when is it considered to be a group? When they start together, as a group. And then they're required to do zimun. Ve'od havi raya, he also brought proof from that which we learned in the Mishnah, Mem He Amud Aleph, that the waiter who ate kazait does combine with them. So this is what's the novel idea here, right? And with the waiter, you'll tell me more than some other person. Therefore, this comes to teach you that even though that other people don't combine unless they're sitting together as a group. Hashamash mistaref, but the waiter does combine below yeshivat keva without having to be a group with them. Be in a group. Because that's the way the waiter eats. In other words, he works and eats at the same time. Okay. All right. I don't think the restaurants will allow you to do that, right? The waiters, to eat and work at the same time. You're gonna get fired like that. Okay, so anyway, below ישיבת קבע, לפי שדרך אכילתו בכך, that's the way he eats, בלי נראה כדברי המפרשים, so it seems to me, it says like the commentaries, אף על פי שלא ברכו המוציא ביחד, even though they didn't bless המוציא together, אלא אחד, rather, right, אחד כך נקבעו, אחר כך נקבעו, באכילה, they just like, ate together. יחד נקבעו לזימון, so then they're together for זימון, ואינם רשאים לחלק, they cannot divide. ומה שהביא ראיה כיצד מברכים, now what she brought proof, from this Gemara, לאו ראיה, he says, not really a proof, he says. The Shani Hatam is different there, the לא אמרי נזל ונכול, נמה בדוכתא פלן, if they don't say, let's go and eat, right, bread in this place. Hayu mitchilat seuda ad. Then there would be from the beginning of the of the seuda until the end. Below keva, without any group setting, whatever group. Below haya echad yachol leotzi chavero. So one could not fulfill the obligation of the other. Aval asibu miktzatan tchila. But if they in the beginning sat some of them together, uva ashlishi ve'esev. And then the third guy came and sat with them. אחר שהתחילו הראשונים לאכול, after the first ones began to eat, ודידן אפילו בישיבה, so he says for us, even sitting together, כיוון שהם קבועים יחד, in other words, for us, we don't recline anymore when we eat. So, just the fact that we're sitting together is like reclining for us. But since they're together in a group, בגמר אכילה, when they're finishing, חייבים לזמן, they have to do זימון. וכן העיד דשמש אדם אחר, שהיה מצטרף כהן השמש. So this is also the same thing with the waiter, that another person who's combining, like the waiter, lo היה מצטרף, he would not combine, כיוון דאינו קבע, because it's not considered to be like a group. עד כאן ישנו. וזה, that's the end of it. וזה מבואר יפה מדברי רבינו ירוחם. So he says it comes out good from this rabbi, he explains it well. וזה לשונו, this is what he says, ויש מי שכתב, there is the one that wrote, שאפילו לא הוקבעו מתחילה, even though they didn't have a group in the beginning, לכך, כיוון שקבע השלישי, uh, since the third guy came in, אחר כך עמהם to join them, או השניים עם השלישי, or the two with the one third guy, אם השלישי קבע הראשון, if the third one ate first, שאינם רשאים לחלק, then they cannot divide it up. כיוון שהם קבועים יחד, since they're eating together as a group, בגמר אכילה, in the end of the meal, כל מקום, אם יאכל עמהם בלא קבע, but in the other case, right, if he eats with them together, without it like a group thing, רשאים לחלק, then he can divide. כי דווקא השמש אם אכל עמהם, only the waiter that ate with them, בלא קבע, without, without fixing the, making a group, כמו שיכתוב, like I'm going to write, ולזה הסכים הראש ז"ל עד כאן ישנו. The Rosh agreed to this, he says. Okay, so that's the end of this Bet Yosef. So it's a long story here, and we'll see what the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So we have here machloket between Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rosh. So we'll see how the Shulchan Aruch goes. So it says here, אפילו לא קבעו בתחילה כולם לאכול יחד. Even if they all didn't come, to eat as a group. אלא שהשניים קבעו ואחר כך בא שלישי. For instance, let's say two people start to eat, right? And then third guy comes in, right? And the קבע עמהם, and he said, sat together with them. או שאחד הוא קבע מתחילה, or let's say one started, ואחר כך קבעו שניים, and then two came together. אינם רשאים לחלק, they cannot divide. Right? So you see from there that even though they didn't start the meal together, right? But they got together, little by little, right? They formed a group. That also means that you have to, make zimun. You cannot divide. So this happens, like often in like a cafeteria, dining room situation, where you have like a group of people there, let's say at the job or at the at the yeshiva or the synagogue, whatever God knows, and each person came, like not at the same time, but all together, right? Once they all came in, they became like one big group or one little group, whatever. So there, right? Since they're all finishing the meal together, more or less, but even though they didn't really start together, but they're together, so therefore they will have to do zimun. That's what he's saying. או שאחר קבע תחילה ואחר כך קבעו השניים עמו. Right, so what else we got here? גמרא אכילה. כל מקום, right, so he says, אינם רשאים לחלק, כיוון שהם קבועים יחד. So in other words, since they're finishing together, they cannot divide it up. מכל מקום, אם יאכל עמהם בלא קבע, רשאים לחלק. But he says, if he will eat with them without any, right, group thing, kind of, then they can divide it up. אלא אם כן הוא שמש, unless he's the waiter. So that's interesting, right? What does that mean when they say that, they're like eating in the same place, but they're not really together? How does that work? So I'm going to look at the Mishnah Berurah to see how he explains that. So Mishnah Berurah says like this, interesting the way he explains it. He says that means that that they were not really one group. How is that? So he says they weren't really sitting together, like on one table. So in other words, they're in the same room, but they're kind of like scattered around, and they're not really together as a group. So that's not really the same thing, there is no zimun there. So when does the zimun kick in? If they're together, on the same table, kind of, they're like, it's like a social kind of a connection there going on, right? So then you would have to do zimun and not separate. But if you're just in the same room, but each one is like in his own world, right? This one is in this corner, that one is in that corner. They're not really together as a group. So then, right, you can split up, no problem. Okay, that's good. Sounds good. So let's see what else we got here. Unless he's the waiter. So then, right, the waiter does combine with them. That's what he's saying. Even though he's not really sitting together with them on the table, as we said in Bet Yosef. Then there comes in the Rama, Gaga, Mikom Makom. So it says Rama, Afilu של השם לחלק, כל מקום של השם עדיף תפל לזמן. So he says, look what he says, right? Wow. Says Mishnah Berurah, says the Rama, even though we said, right, there are certain scenarios where they're allowed to divide, and not do zimun, but he says it's better to do zimun anyway. Oh. Mishum de Rov Amadat Melech. Why? Because he says it's like, Hashem prefers to have a group together, serving God. Wow. Okay, let's see what Mishnah Berurah says about that. That's interesting. That is very interesting. Right, so he talks about something interesting here, which is that it could be, that if you're not really obligated to do zimun and you're allowed to divide, it could be that it's forbidden to say it altogether. You know, that's the thing. So it's not so clear. The words of the Rama are not so clear here because he's telling you it's better, even though you're absolved and you can separate, but it's better to do it together anyway. It makes zimun. But says Mishnah Berurah, sometimes it can be a detriment. Why? Because it could be that you're not allowed to. So if you do it, it's like you're saying the name of God in vain because you're mentioning the name of God if you have 10 people or more. So therefore, right? Yeah, I'm sorry.
So when is it that you're not allowed to be part of the Simun?
So what he's saying is like this, right? Let's say, everybody ate in the same room, right? But they were not really a group, like each one is in his own place, in his own world. They're not really together, on the same table, whatever. So, each one they're just in the same room. So there, right, we said in Shulchan Aruch that you're allowed to divide. So comes the Rama and says, you know what? Anyway, it's better to say together. It's a zimun, even though you don't have to. But comes Mishnah Berurah and says, that may not be the case because sometimes, it's just a matter of that, you can't do it. It's not allowed to do it. Not only you're not obligated, you're not allowed to do it either. So he says, what would be a good example of that? If you are saying the name of God in vain, right? So there, you wouldn't want to do that. So therefore, in a case like that, he seems to be saying, right, better not to do it at all, because who told you that you're allowed? Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about that also when I read this Ramah. It's not exactly so smooth, this whole thing. But anyway, right, that's pretty much right. But the bottom line is, you're not obligated, that's for sure. And probably you're better off not doing it at all because it may be forbidden altogether to do it. That's the thing. So when in doubt, throw it out, right? That's what they say. So we'll just, we'll leave it out. But the Ramah is saying that, if it's better to do it because anyway, right? It's possible to do it, but not everybody agrees with that. Okay, that's very interesting. So I guess we'll stop there. Thanks for coming tonight. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch Laila Tov. We'll see you tomorrow, Bezat Hashem. Sleep well.
Kavod Arav, thank you so much.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
God
Rabbi.
bless.